Welcome to tonight's virtual Civil War lecture brought to you by CivilWarTalk.com. Thanks for joining us. Tonight's guest is retired Special Forces Brigadier General John R. Scales, author of the book, The Battles and Campaigns of Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, 1861 to 1865, published by Savas Beatty in 2017. This series is provided to you by CivilWarTalk.com, the American Civil War discussion forum. We're pleased to be able to bring these fantastic Civil War programs to you via the live platform. If you aren't already a member of CivilWarTalk.com, we'll be providing some more information about membership later in the program, and I hope everyone will become a member of Civil War Talk. If you're the author of a great Civil War book, or a battlefield guide, or a researcher or collector, and you have a story to tell, we'd love to speak with you about providing a presentation like this one. If you are one of those people who have a story, but maybe the Zoom presentation is not your thing or a little bit more than you can handle, Mike can help you with a book launch at CivilWarTalk.com and also partner with you to execute a social media campaign to go along with a Civil War Talk Zoom presentation. Schedule your book launch today at CivilWarTalk.com.
Our guest tonight is John R. Scales, a retired Special Forces Brigadier General with more than 3 decades of service, including combat tours in Vietnam, I mixed up my pages, Afghanistan, Vietnam and Afghanistan. He also has a PhD in engineering and worked in that field after retiring from the military. In addition to receiving 5 patents for inventions, General Scales has written 2 previous books, Sherman Invades Georgia, through the Naval Institute Press of 2006, and A Reluctant Hero's Footsteps, the Westbow Press 2012, a past president of the Tennessee Valley Civil War Roundtable. He leads Civil War campaign tours in Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. Tonight, General Scales will discuss his latest book, The Battles and Campaigns of General Nathan Bedford Forrest, 1861 through 1865, a careful and unique examination of Forrest's wartime activities and how his actions affected the war in the Western theater. The Tennessean was one of the most intriguing and controversial characters to emerge during the Civil War. Books and articles on the man span the gamut from hero worship because of his remarkable battlefield victories to condemnation for his involvement with the slaughter at Fort Pillow and later his association with the Ku Klux Klan. In this book, Scales plows new ground. Please join me in welcoming General John R. Scales.
Well, thank you, and hopefully everybody can hear me now. Yep. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and present in this time of otherwise everyone staying at home. So I'm going to hopefully not bore you to tears over the next few minutes. Let me set the stage a little bit with my first slide. Well, that didn't work, did it? Let's go to this one. There we go. Okay, you all recognize General Forrest there, but the title is, Did Forrest Make a Difference? Now, what does that mean? Well, I've received feedback from people that say, well, you know, okay, Forrest won this and did that, but most of what he did was away from the regular army, you know, and so how much effect did it really have on the flow of the war? Wasn't it just sort of a sideshow that you could take or leave? And so I looked at that and said, well, you know, I think there are a few places, so let's go through and see what my opinion is on those places. Okay, now let's see if we can make this thing go forward, which right at the moment it's not doing. There we go, I'll do it that way. All right, just a little background. Most of you know he was born in Chapel Hill, Tennessee. It's about 60 miles north of where I'm sitting right now. It's south of Nashville. He had almost no formal education. Moved to Mississippi as a teenager, and then his father died within the next 2 years. So he had a twin sister, but he was the eldest male, and the burden of the farm actually fell upon him. his mother remarried, and so he joined his uncle, who was a livery stable owner and a horse trader. The uncle was actually killed in front of him. There was an altercation, and Forrest drove the other attackers off. He didn't kill them. There were 3 of them, but he wounded each of the 3, although he sustained a wound himself. All right. He actually took over his uncle's business in Hernando. This was in Hernando, Mississippi, grew it, but then he branched out into slaves, which is, he'd grown up extremely poor, so he hadn't really dealt directly with slaves until he went to work with his uncle. But he had both horse and slave trading in the livery stable in Hernando, but he wanted to expand, so he moved to Memphis. And he was very successful there. He was elected alderman twice, and he made enough money to have a large plantation down in Mississippi. Okay. Well, as you know, Tennessee didn't join in the first wave of states. They thought the Union was a better deal for them then, until after Fort Sumter, when Lincoln called for volunteers. At that time, 4 states seceded, the last of them being Tennessee. Forrest had always said he was a pro-Union man, but after the state seceded, he offered his services. He actually enlisted as a private in Josiah White's cavalry company there in Memphis, and went up to Randolph, up the Mississippi, up the Mississippi River to do some training. But of course, he, being a prominent and very well-off citizen, the governor, Isham Harris, offered him a lieutenant colonelcy if he would raise a battalion. So he immediately returned to Memphis and started that. He trained his men, and he did raise a battalion, eight companies of cavalry, most of them Alabamians actually, and trained them till October, then went forward into Kentucky and patrolled up to Union lines, and in some cases up to the Ohio River. He had his first engagements up there, but when Grant took, he started his river campaign, and when he took Fort Henry, or really the flotilla did, and was threatening Donelson, Forrest was called to Donelson to take charge of all the cavalry there. There was another cavalry battalion, but they had been ineffective. And he had very good service there, and was able to escape at the end. He asked permission from General Pillow and was granted permission to escape. He went to Nashville with his people and was promptly put in charge of evacuating supplies and military equipment from Nashville to Murfreesboro. He got to Murfreesboro. He was told to take 20 days leave and recruit some more guys. So he did, reported back into Huntsville, Alabama, and then was moved eventually to Burnsville, Mississippi, where he took place in the Shiloh campaign. He took part in one attack on the first day in Shiloh. He did a reconnaissance, did well. In fact, was trying to find somebody to report the fact that Buell's army was reinforcing Grant, and couldn't find anybody that seemed to care. So he predicted they'd get whipped, and they did the second day. But the next day after that is when he was wounded very seriously at Fallen Timbers. It's an interesting story there. Sherman actually had 2 brigades pursuing the retreating Confederate army. He saw a hospital on top of a hill, and he didn't see the 300 cavalry hidden behind the hill. Sherman moved an infantry regiment forward, basically as skirmishers in front of his 2 brigades, and put his cavalry squadron next, and then came Sherman, and then came the 2 brigades in column. Well, the infantry moved forward, but it had rained real hard last night. There's a little wet weather stream there, and my speculation is that when they hit that stream, they decided, let's not get our feet wet. Infantrymen hate to get their feet wet. So they probably lost their formation and cohesion crossing the stream, and that's when Forrest hit them with 300. Well, the infantry turned and ran, which spooked the cavalry, which turned and ran. And there was Sherman facing these oncoming cavalrymen. Sherman said after the war that if Forrest hadn't already used up his rounds out of his pistol, that would have been the end of his career. But as I say, he was seriously wounded and had to convalesce at home in Memphis. He returned to the army. They were patrolling around Corinth. And then, of course, Beauregard retreated down to Tupelo away from Corinth. But he identified a need, or that is, he was told of a need for a cavalry general in East Tennessee. And so he immediately thought of Forrest and said, I'm going to send you. He had to convince him for a while because Forrest would have to leave his then regiment to go to East Tennessee. But he did that. So let me set up the situation here, because this is the first time I think he made a difference. All right. July 1862. Halleck has moved to Washington, split his army into two pieces. Grant is in northern Mississippi and West Tennessee. Buell is in Middle Tennessee. Grant's objective is Vicksburg. Buell's objective is Chattanooga. The Confederate Army is down in Tupelo. Bragg is taken over from Beauregard, and there is a small force in East Tennessee under Kirby Smith, 5,000 in Chattanooga and 5,000 in Knoxville. But as you can see, Buell's got well over 40,000 people in North Alabama. He was told to take Chattanooga, but also repair the Memphis and Charleston Railroad going across North Alabama so it could be used to supply, as well as the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, which had been torn up, and he had to put both of those together. So anyway, I've already basically said most of this. The Confederate cavalry that Kirby Smith had, he had actually several brigades there, or I'm sorry, several regiments there. But the colonels were all convinced they should be the one in charge and were senior to the others, so they wouldn't cooperate, and very little training was done. So Forrest got there, he took over, even though he was still a full colonel and not a brigadier general, but everyone knew it was pending. He formed a brigade. Now, meanwhile, Grant is looking at Vicksburg, but all his guys are from Ohio, Minnesota, Illinois, places like that. And the climate's unhealthy. So basically, he stayed in that northern Mississippi, West Tennessee area and was sort of stymied there for a little bit. So Bragg looks at that and, over in Tupelo, and he says, you know, I think it'd be a good idea if I move my army to Chattanooga and help relieve it. But unfortunately, he's got a problem. To get the heavy equipment, the trains, the artillery, he's got to use by rail, which means he's got to go all the way from Tupelo to Mobile, Alabama, up to Montgomery, to Atlanta, to Chattanooga. So he needs time. Well, Kirby Smith turns to Forrest and says, well, actually, this is what he told Richmond. He said, Colonel Forrest, with 3 regiments of cavalry, was sent into Middle Tennessee. He will, I trust, delay Buell's movement till Bragg's columns make their appearance. So 3 regiments of cavalry versus 40,000 plus infantry. So that was what we had to look at. Forrest went through the Cumberland Plateau, avoiding the Union troops, which are actually less than 30 miles from Chattanooga, and struck Murfreesboro, southeast of Atlanta. He had a supply depot there. He could tear up the railroad, the Nashville and Chattanooga. And actually, he was behind enemy lines, but the area was solidly Confederate. And the Confederacy weren't the only people that had colonels fighting with each other. There were 2 infantry regiments, a battalion of cavalry, and a section of artillery in Murfreesboro. But the 2 regiment commanders didn't agree with each other. So they stayed in different places. And let's see if I can get the pointer here. Maybe I can get a pointer out. Okay. So one regiment in the cavalry was here. The other regiment was actually up here at a campsite. So Forrest comes in, he actually bypassed some of the pickets, runs into town. Now there were Confederate sympathizers being held prisoners downtown in the jail and in the courthouse, and a Union general had just arrived the day before right here. So anyway, Forrest sent some people downtown to free the prisoners, sent some up to attack Parkhurst and the Michigan boys up here, and sent some others up here to face off against the 3rd Minnesota. Well, it took a while, but he managed to overrun and cause the surrender of Parkhurst. And then he went over and sent a flag of truce into Lester and said, hey, you should really surrender too. And somehow Lester, he wanted to talk to Parkhurst, even though they didn't get along. And he said, well, I want to talk. So he gave him a flag of truce. And somehow Forrest's 1,500 guys seemed to Lester that there were 3,000 or 4,000 of them. So he surrendered too. 120 killed and wounded on the Union side, 1,200 captured, 4 guns, 50 wagons. Forrest lost less than 100 men. Now, almost anyone would have said, okay, I just did a great raid. Now I need to get back before they concentrate against me. Nope. He went from Murfreesboro to McMinnville, restored a few days, and then launched another raid to the outskirts of Nashville. Killed 10 soldiers, wounded 15 or 20, captured 97, burned 3 railroad bridges and a station with 0 casualties. He had to dodge an infantry division looking for him up here. That's what that dog leg was right there. And then he returned back to McMinnville. And he stayed back there. Now he got pushed out of McMinnville, which is now here, all the way back as far as Crossville. But he stayed back there threatening Buell's railroads and communications. And then he launched another raid, which was not particularly successful. He lost a fair number of people there. But then he got back here, and guess what had happened? By this time, Bragg had moved his army all the way to Chattanooga and was now up to Sparta. And this was the genesis of the Kentucky campaign. So, summary. Buell had 10,000 soldiers within 30 miles of Chattanooga, and between 40 and 50,000 headed that way. There were only 5,000 defenders. The railroads were repaired and ready to supply. Forrest managed to delay Buell's advance by 6 to 8 weeks. And Chattanooga did not fall until September of '63, over a year later. So I would make the argument that Forrest's persisting threat behind Union lines delayed the progression of the war in the West, probably by a year. Okay, what else happened? Well, the Kentucky thing didn't work out well, although Bragg took 4 soldiers away from him and said, go back to Tennessee and get some more. So he did. And Bragg eventually ended up back and was at Murfreesboro. And in December, now Forrest had a little over 2,000 guys. He was moved to the far west flank in Columbia, and he had not well-equipped people, but some good people there. However, remember, we left Grant somewhere waiting for better weather. Well, Grant is now moving on Vicksburg. His main avenue of approach is down the railroad. this way. He has 10,000 soldiers securing the rail lines here. And he sends one of his corps under Sherman downriver, and that will eventually lead to Chickasaw Bluff. So Pemberton, now in charge on the Confederate side down here, says, I need help, I need help. Well, Bragg looks around and says, well, I'm here. I'm going to give an order to Forrest. Forrest didn't like the order, said, hey, I'm not ready to do combat operations yet. I don't even have very many percussion caps for my weapons. Bragg, yeah, well, in modern terminology, Bragg told him that sounds like a personal problem. So what did he tell him to do? Cross into West Tennessee, that is, cross the Tennessee River. Fall on the depots, lines of communications, destroying them. Effectually frustrate his campaign, now commencing against Mississippi, and place his force there in jeopardy. So that's what Forrest did. He crossed the Tennessee River, had a long series of engagements against those 10,000 people, fooling them very much about how many people he had. But he tore up this railroad, which was Grant's supply line, particularly here at the Obion River, where there was a swamp next to the river and a very long causeway for the railroad. And they burned that causeway. It took 6 months to repair. All right, then he started going back, but by this time, 2 infantry brigades were all over him. So, but the 2 brigades were separate. So he went to one of them here at Parker's Crossroads and fought that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Overall, I'll talk about this now since it's here. He lost 400 men out of his 2,000. 300 were taken prisoner. And Union losses were around 1,300 over 1,000 prisoners. But what happened was he got trapped. He had that 1 brigade beat. There were some white flags, although the commander later said, no, I didn't intend to surrender. But the people he'd sent to delay the other brigade and give him early warning got lost. And so the other brigade came up behind him. That's the famous, we got to charge them 2 ways story there. Parker's Crossroads, if you ever go there, it's a great little battlefield. It's a state park, and they've done a lot for preservation. So anyway, at the same time this was going on, Earl Van Dorn got around Grant and burned Grant's supplies at Holly Springs. So Grant, in his memoirs, talked about Holly Springs, and then he said, at the same time, Forrest got on a line of railroad. This cut me off from all communications for over a week and demonstrated the impossibility of maintaining so long a line of road. I determined, therefore, to abandon my campaign into the interior. That's when Grant said, okay, I'm going to use the river now. Vicksburg did not fall for 6 months. Okay, Forrest came back. He was assigned under Wheeler, did not get along with Wheeler for several reasons. When Van Dorn actually showed up there at Columbia and then to Spring Hill, he put Forrest under his command, but gave him an additional brigade. So now Forrest has got 2 brigades of cavalry. Forrest helped trap a Union brigade that had to surrender to them as a part of Van Dorn's effort. Then he was called away to stop Straight's raid, where Strait was moving across North Alabama to try to break Bragg's railroad in Georgia. Of course, he managed to stop and capture them. All right, then Van Dorn was killed by a jealous husband. And so Forrest suddenly was in command of 2 cavalry divisions. That didn't last long because Red Jackson's division got sent back to Mississippi to try to counteract Grierson. So he then had 1 cavalry division. He was the left flank protection for Bragg's position now at Shelbyville, because when Forrest had been in West Tennessee, Bragg had fought the Battle of Murfreesboro/Stones River and had retreated from that. So now Bragg was further south, actually along the Highland Rim. His headquarters were in Shelbyville. And Forrest was protecting his west flank, okay, around Columbia. All right, well, the Tullahoma campaign happened, and Bragg successively retreated all the way to Chattanooga and past it. Once Forrest got to Chattanooga, he was then assigned to the right flank, that is northeast of Chattanooga along the Tennessee River, to guard against Rosecrans crossing the Tennessee. Well, of course, Rosecrans chose the other flank to cross and got across successfully. Fought at Chickamauga. He actually opened the battle on the preliminary day. He was one of the ones that opened the battle. That didn't. Some people say it was just a 2-day battle, but it really was a 3-day battle. He missed one opportunity. On the last day of the battle, Granger reinforced the position on Horseshoe Ridge, Chickamauga. Forrest tried to delay him, but did not try that hard because his men had fought for 3 straight days and were almost out of ammunition. So he was kind of brushed aside by Granger. Granger arrived 15 minutes before the decisive attack by Longstreet on Horseshoe Ridge. Had Forrest been able to delay 15 more minutes, Thomas probably would not have made it out of his position. But, Forrest had no way knowing. He was on the other flank over there. And like I said, he was almost out of ammunition. Sometimes you don't win. Well, he had a showdown with Bragg because Bragg was giving him a hard time. He tried to resign. President Davis said, no, I'm going to send you to Mississippi, a proposal Forrest had already made. You take 300 men with you, recruiting new men. Well, it didn't take long. Other people were already recruiting. He consolidated all his cavalry and ended up with 3,000 people. Okay, now we go to February 1864. Sherman is in Vicksburg. He has 21,000 infantry. He's opposed by Polk at Jackson, Mississippi, with 10,000. Forrest is up along the Tallahatchie River, and there's actually 5,000 cavalry under Sooy Smith in Memphis, and there's 2,000 more coming. So Sherman, heeding Napoleon's maxim that you can do almost anything with a bayonet except sit on it, Sherman decides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack Polk, and I'm going to push him. I'm going to push him all the way to Meridian, and I'm going to order Sooy Smith to bring his cavalry and join me there. He's going to have 3 things to do. He's got to defeat and hopefully kill Forrest. He needs to burn the Mississippi Prairie region, which is this region being covered by Forrest, very literally here, which was a major food source for the Confederacy, and then join Sherman in Meridian. Now, Sherman says, if this works out, we will then, in Meridian, move east to Selma, destroying the armaments factories and depots there, and burning this portion of the Black Belt. And then we will turn and take Mobile from the rear. That was Sherman's plan. He also had Banks do a diversion against Mobile, and Logan up here threatened Joe Johnston. So anyway, Sooy Smith's got 7,000 cavalry now. Forrest has about half that. But I said he had 5,000, or Sooy Smith had 5,000. But he was worried about Forrest, so he waited for that extra 2,000 to show up, okay? And of course, then they had to be reshoed and fed a little more. So he didn't leave Memphis until it was too late to meet Sherman. He moved slowly too. He reached West Point, north of Starkville, and he looked to his left, and Forrest troopers were behind the Tombigbee River. And in front of him, there were Forrest troopers behind the Tibby Creek, which is a very wide, deep creek. And on his right, there were more Forrest troopers behind another creek, the Chunkanachie Creek. And so he says, I'm almost surrounded here. I'm too late. Sherman's probably already gone anyway. I'm going to turn around and retreat. Well, Forrest figured that out right away and started a tough retreat. Grierson, who was Sooy Smith's second in command, tried to set a trap at Okolona, but Forrest figured it out and taunted him. And then Grierson finally looked back behind himself on the road, and he says, the rest of the force is already headed up the road. All I got's a brigade here, and more and more Forrest men are coming up, so I think I'll need to retreat too. Well, he didn't anymore get his people out on the road to start on column, to start moving back up the road to join the rest of them when Forrest, that's when he hit him. And it became a pursuit for a while. Okay. Forrest's youngest brother was actually killed at Prairie Mound, which is northwest of Okolona, but a part of this campaign. But to give you an idea, it took Smith 10 days to reach West Point from Collierville, which is right outside of Memphis. But it took him 3 days to make it back. So that's kind of what happened there. But what happened? Not that many losses, 380 for Smith, 145 for Forrest. But the key thing is, what stopped Smith? It was Forrest's reputation by that time. It wasn't any idea of numbers. The Union cavalry was well trained. These weren't rookies, but the fear of Forrest was high enough to where he waited, and then when he saw that he was about to come into contact, he turned. Sherman never got past Meridian, and the agricultural regions, Selma's armaments factories and Mobile, were all spared for another year. Now, why were those agricultural regions so important? Well, you know, Joe Johnston was over there in North Georgia trying to defend Georgia and Atlanta. So you would think that he's got plenty of supplies, right? The commissary department in Richmond had declared that Georgia was the property of the Army of Northern Virginia in terms of supplies. So Alabama and Mississippi were supplying Joe Johnston, even though he was protecting Georgia. So anyway, afterwards, West Tennessee, March and April of '64. Forrest moves north. There's a bunch of scattered outposts out there. Of course, Memphis is very strongly held, but many of these are not strongly held. Paducah is not that strongly held, nor is Columbus, nor is Fort Pillow. So anyway, Forrest sends some of these guys, his Mississippi people, to man an outpost line along the Tallahatchie, and also to look for people that are dodging a draft. His Tennessee and Kentucky people, he brings into West Tennessee. Now, interestingly, at Union City, Tennessee, there was a unit. It was the 7th Tennessee Cavalry Union, 475 people. So Forrest, in his usual give him a dare demeanor, sent the 7th Tennessee Confederate to see what they could do against the 7th Tennessee Union. The commander of the 7th Tennessee Confederate pulled a bluff on the Union and said, all of Forrest is here, and they surrendered, no casualties. The rest of the force, which had Forrest with them, went to Paducah, but they were unable to take a fort there, which was very strongly defended. They didn't really try, although there was a Kentucky regiment with Forrest that had been recruited there, and they gave it a dare, and the commander was actually killed inside of his own house. So the word got around that, hey, you can be bluffed. Forrest is going to bluff you. But if you sit in the fort and fight hard, you know, Forrest probably can't do much. He gave his guys several weeks leave so that they could recruit more men, change clothes, get better horses, all that sort of thing. He raided Paducah again, not to take the fort, but because the newspapers had proclaimed how he had missed a bunch of horses the first time and where they'd been hidden. So he sent Buford back up there again to steal those horses, and he got them. But he decided to do one last blow before returning in April to Mississippi. And he had to return because, you know, the spring is actually, if you're a farming community, the spring is actually where you have less to eat than most other times. So he about skint that area of Mississippi bare. So he had to return to Mississippi, or that area of Tennessee, rather. But he decided to take out Fort Pillow, which was an irritant to many of the people of West Tennessee. It was actually a center for cotton smuggling and raids by the Tennessee troops. There were about 600 soldiers there, about half of them U.S. colored troops, half of them the 13th Tennessee Battalion, U.S. Sherman had told them, leave it, but Hurlbut, the commander there, he disobeyed because of the cotton smuggling. So anyway, Forrest gets his people there. Chalmers actually leads them. The first Union position was on what's called the Inner Works. If you've ever been there, that's close to where the center is, the visitor center is. And this was Tennessee boys, Union Tennessee boys. They got pushed off real promptly. You can see that this is very highly eroded and dissected here. So Forrest was able to get his troops very close to the final position up here. McCulloch's guys actually got up into these shacks. And the Tennessee boys all gathered down here where they couldn't be seen. Forrest also mounted snipers on all the high ground and were shooting into this battery, which had no headlocks, no overhead cover or anything. So a bunch of people were killed by the snipers, including the commander. Booth, there is a picture of him. All right, the second in command, Bradford, the Tennessean, refused to surrender. Yeah, I guess he was thinking about the other times and thought, well, maybe Forrest really doesn't mean it, or maybe that gunboat out in the river will help protect me. Forrest gave them a chance to surrender. They didn't. So Forrest went back all the way up here to have the bugle command, because these ravines, that was the only place that everyone could hear a command from. They assaulted the fort. Half of the Union garrison was killed. Another percentage was wounded, and a fair number were marched away as prisoners. But some of those killed, and there's no doubt about this, some of those people who were killed had tried to surrender and were shot down in cold blood. So there were war crimes. Now Forrest was up here. And as soon as he saw his guys go over the wall, he went down like this and up the trail here. It took him between 10 and 15 minutes to get there. And by that time, the firing up there had ceased entirely. Now, he had people actually down here on the bluff to totally trap things and also to keep the river boats away. And so when some people ran, they ran into a ambush right down there, and a lot of people were killed down there. But there's no doubt there were war crimes. Forrest lost about 100 casualties. Like I say, about half of the people were killed, disproportionately the U.S. colored troops, that is the black soldiers. All right, there was a big congressional investigation. It became a campaign issue. There was talk about torture, never substantiated. But what it did was it potentially affected the election. Back in the day, you didn't see a lot of congressional reports, but this report that alleged all of these atrocities, some of which actually did occur, was printed in 40,000 copies to affect the election. It also stimulated Union recruiting, particularly U.S. colored troops, and caused them to vow revenge and to fight harder subsequently. And course, the worst part of it probably is it greatly added to racial animosity that goes to the present day. So anyway, that was Fort Pillow. After that, Sherman was looking to attack Joe Johnston and take Atlanta. But he told one of his Army commanders, McPherson, said the worst we have to fear is that Forrest comes in on our right and destroys the communications. So Sherman arranges a series of raids from Memphis directly against Forrest. And again, Forrest has got to protect the prairie and the Black Belt to feed Joe Johnston's army. So he stays to protect. 3 major engagements: Bryce's Crossroads, Hattiesburg, and a raid on Memphis. Bryce's Crossroads, probably his best battle. Harrisburg, under S.D. Lee's tactical command, was a defeat, but the Union decided to, under A.J. Smith, decided to retreat anyway. So A.J. Smith was told to take some more people and go back and do it again. Forrest, meanwhile, had to transfer some people over to Alabama. So he had even less strength. So he split his force and sent half of it to Memphis, and he accompanied that half, and left Chalmers to try to delay A.J. Smith. Well, he got into Memphis, didn't capture any of the generals, which is what he hoped to do, but he caused a lot of consternation and a lot of message traffic that essentially caused A.J. Smith to stop what he was doing, which was the real purpose. One funny thing, the guy in charge in Memphis, a guy named Washburn, they tried to catch him in the Gayoso Hotel, but he heard the commotion downstairs and ran out the back in his nightshirt and made it to a federal fort on the banks of the Mississippi. Coincidentally, Hurlbut, who had been in charge before and been relieved, was in town visiting, but he was staying someplace other than his assigned room. And he also managed to avoid capture, but he later made probably one of the best remarks coming out of the Civil War. He said, well, they relieved me because I couldn't keep Forrest out of West Tennessee, but Washburn can't even keep him out of his own bedroom. Thought that was a pretty good comment. But anyway, it worked. Though Sherman worked, his supply lines remained secure. Forrest lost men and horses. Then after Atlanta fell, suddenly now, okay, it's time to go raid Sherman's communications. 2 raids. One of them against the Nashville and Decatur Railroad here, which was successful, but he couldn't touch the Nashville and Chattanooga because Sherman was able to free up enough troops to really protect it. Got back, was sent on another raid up to Johnsonville, destroyed Johnsonville, destroyed a bunch of steamers, but again, because Hood's army, or now Hood, Johnston got relieved, Hood's army had been so depleted by offensive operations that Sherman didn't need that much ammunition anymore and could afford to spend his forces in guarding things. Okay, so what happened next? Hood decides to go to Nashville and wants Forrest in charge. So, in charge of the cavalry, that is. So Hood pushed Schofield all the way up. Forrest manages to push Wilson totally out of the battles, out of the whole campaign, really, the first half of the campaign, that is. So he pushes them, sets up success for Hood to cut off Schofield's army at Spring Hill, but it doesn't happen. Then came Franklin. Forrest recommends to Hood, give me an infantry division and I can have Schofield out of his position in a few hours. Hood decided a frontal attack was required. That's what he did, and we all know what happened there. Then Hood sent Forrest to Murfreesboro saying, try to take that. Well, Murfreesboro had a lot more men than Forrest did, and he couldn't do anything there. Hood got defeated by Thomas. Running back to the Tennessee River in Alabama, Forrest joins him at Columbia, takes charge of the rear guard, and saves the rest of the army. Okay, so 1865. Wilson builds up 15,000 men in North Alabama. Forrest now is in charge of all the cavalry in the whole theater, 10,000 men. But he's got to put some people in front of Memphis, Vicksburg, Baton Rouge, Pensacola, and Huntsville, Alabama, plus Wilson. He had to put people in front of all those, not just for early warning, but also because it's wintertime, so he had to disperse all his people to be able to subsist. Whereas Wilson had a supply line. They repaired that Nashville and Decatur line, and they could bring stuff up the Tennessee River. So Wilson didn't have the same problems. So anyway, March, Wilson attacks, comes south. Forrest has the bad luck to have his orders captured, so Wilson knows what he's up to. There's some inefficiency on the part of Chalmers' division, so Forrest was never able to gather more than 2,500 of his own people and some militia to try to defend. When he got to Selma, which was fortified, he had little knowledge of the fortifications, but Wilson had a lot because one of the people he'd captured earlier was an engineer who had helped design and work on the Selma fortifications. So anyway, Forrest lost that battle pretty decisively, managed to get away with a lot of his people. Wilson went on to take Selma, Montgomery, continued to Georgia, and then Richard Taylor surrenders the entire theater in May of '65. So anyway, for a summary, 4 key points where Forrest, I believe, did make a difference in the duration. Murfreesboro, he kept Buell out of Chattanooga, delayed the fall of Chattanooga for a year. And Chattanooga was a vital rail junction. West Tennessee stalled Grant by 4 to 6 months. Mississippi prevented Sooy Smith from joining Sherman, saving the Prairie, the Black Belt, Selma, and Mobile for a year. And Fort Pillow, very negative effect. War crimes that occurred there arguably shortened the war and increased sectional and racial hatred. So if he didn't make a difference in the outcome of the war, he certainly made a difference during the duration. So, okay, I'll talk about my book just for a second. 466 pages, 109 maps. I've got order of battle information and driving directions. Now, I sell them for $20, $25 if you want me to autograph it and then put it in the mail, and that's to cover the mail. But this is actually Johnsonville. It's what you're looking at here. This is the map of, not actually Johnsonville, I'm sorry, Fort Hyman and Paris Landing right here. You can see where the batteries were and where they trapped the boats and captured the gunboats. And of course, this is all lake now, but that's the old channel of the river. These are driving directions set off with a different background, and then just the standard text is here. So, okay, I actually have one more, but I think you guys are going to go into all of this. I should mention my book 4 will hopefully come out soon, but it's a fictional book set in the near future and involves special forces. So, all the Civil War buffs wouldn't be interested in that. So that's the end of my presentation. So back to you.
Okay, we're gonna take some questions. We've got a lot of questions in the chat log. So if you have thought of a question while General Scales was speaking, if you want to go ahead and enter that in the chat box, again, you'll find the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and you can go ahead and enter those questions. But before we do that, General Scales, I'd like to introduce Mike Kendra. Mike is the owner and manager of Civil War Talk, the forum.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, General Scales. That was great. I appreciate you providing a presentation tonight, and good evening, everyone. So I'm Mike Kendra. I'm the owner of Civil War Talk. Tonight, Civil War Talk's hosting General John R. Scales, our guest presenter on Zoom. And this is a great opportunity to learn about another great piece of American history. But Civil War Talk is much, much more than a weekly Zoom meeting. Although we have our share of everyday visitors who share stories and do research, we also have a large community of historians, reenactors, and students, and I even say fanatics about the American Civil War. Many of us don't just read a story or two about the Civil War, we live and love to learn about the area. It's our passion. I'm actually going to go ahead and show you actually right now. I'm going to share my screen so you can go ahead and see. Yes, click on here. There you go. So you should be seeing hopefully my screen now. But this is actually Civil War Talk if you haven't seen it before. And actually, this is here's the presentation we're watching right now. So if you visited our website, this is what you would have seen. And you know, you can see that we have lots of different people that are currently online and lots of different stories that we've highlighted for the day. And we have plenty of different threads going on down here about different topics. We have all different kinds of topics, like even pertinent topics for tonight. Like I highlighted this one. This is a biography on Nathan Bedford Forrest. So hopefully all this is accurate. I'm sure we could find out tonight if how much of this is right and how much of this is wrong. But you know, we have all kinds of information here on Civil War Talk that you can go ahead and find out about. So let me unshare my screen, but that's just like a little sampling of my thing up here went. Let's unshare. How do we do that? Stop. But just want to let you guys know that Civil War Talk's available with 115,000 different discussions and 24,000 members, and it's all about the war between the states. And we'd love to see you there. It's all free. It always has been, and it's really easy to join. If you'd like to become a premium member, you'll be able to avoid all our Google advertisements, and you'll be able to register for our future Zoom meetings as a premium member. And it's as little as $12 a year. So I'd like to invite you to join our community today. And if you haven't already, you'll find stories that you'll cherish, and you'll find knowledge that'll thrill, challenge, and enlighten you, and you'll find friends that'll last a lifetime. Join Civil War Talk tonight, and we hope we'll see you all in our community soon. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks, Mike. We are going to take a look at some of General Scales' books and tell you how to order them and how to get a, let's see if we can cancel the spotlight. I don't know. Okay, so here's a really great deal from Savas Beatty. We are so excited to have General Scales here tonight, and we want you to remember that all of the presenters do this program without compensation. So we encourage everyone to order the books and get your own copy of General Scales' Battles and Campaigns of Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest. And in appreciation of you attending this program, Savas Beatty would like to offer you a 20% discount off your total purchase, not just off of General Scales books. So what you'll do is you'll go to savasbeatty.com, load General Scales book in your cart, then purchase anything, pick out anything else that you want. And when you check out, enter the code that Tina has typed into the chat box for you, all caps. General Scales, this is not his first book. He has 2 previous books that are available at, through his website. You can go to johnarscales.com to see those. A Reluctant Hero's Footsteps, published by Westbow in 2013. He used after action reports of the 329th Infantry Regiment to reconstruct his father's path in World War II, which is just fascinating to me. And then the other book, published in 2013 by the U.S. Naval Institute Press, Sherman Invades Georgia. I'm sure that'll be interesting to all the Civil War buffs here. Focuses on the operational level campaign planning and so forth, rather than specific battles. So a unique approach to Sherman's march. You can order these books by going to John's website and following the links there, johnarscales.com. And we hope that everyone will purchase the books. Just go ahead and order all 3, right, General Scales? That'd be fine with you. We want to go ahead and tell you who's going to be with us. I think Mike's going to be adding a link on the homepage that'll show you a schedule in like real time, so you don't have to wait for these these Wednesday night programs to find out who's coming next. But just so you know, next week, Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m., Janet Elizabeth Croon will be with us, and she will be talking about her award-winning book, The War Outside My Window, The Civil War Diary of Leroy Wiley Gresham, which is a fascinating story about a young man who was bedridden and wrote a diary while he was ill in Georgia. So it's a fascinating book. On October 14th, Lance Hertigan will be with us to talk about the Iron Brigade. Neil P. Chatelaine on October 21st, Confederate Navy program on his book, Defending the Arteries of Rebellion, which is the Confederate Navy. And on October 28th, some of you met Jerry Wooten a couple of weeks ago when I had to put him on the spot. We had a microphone malfunction, and Jerry was in attendance, and I had to kind of put him on the spot. So we all need to support Jerry and be here that night because he was really nice to do that. Anyway, he'll be talking about Johnsonville, and you just mentioned that, General Scales. So you might want to come to that one. That one is October 28th, which is just in advance of the anniversary. I don't know how many anniversaries, but several, 150 something. On November 4th, we have Scott Mingus, and his program will be on the book's called Targeted Tracks, the Cumberland Valley Railroad, and he'll be telling us all about the Cumberland Valley Railroad and its role in the Civil War. Ron Kirkwood on November 11th, which is he'll be speaking about his book Too Much for Human Endurance, the George Spangler Farm at Gettysburg. It was a hospital, and that should be fascinating. Steve Norder will be here on December 2nd. Lincoln Takes Command, the campaign to seize Norfolk. Chris Loperfido with Death, Disease, and Life at War, the Civil War Letters of Surgeon James D. Benton of the 111th and 98th New York. And then on December 30th, we'll have John Horstein back, and his program that night will be on the anniversary of the sailing or the sinking of the USS Monitor. And we're excited to have that one. So hope to see everybody next week. Thank you for joining us. General Scales, thank you so much for being here with us. We enjoyed it very much. We'll see everybody here next Wednesday night, October 7th at 8:30 with Jan Caroon for The War Outside My Window, the Civil War Diary of Leroy Wiley Gresham. Hope to see you then.
Okay, we're going to do, I see some questions. Do we want to do those?
Oh yeah, we've got lots of questions. Good point. Let's do those questions. Let's see. We'll do those now. Let's see. We're going to start with the first ones that were entered in the chat. And let's see. We have a question from David, and he would like to know, would Forrest fit into this is a great question. Would Forrest fit into the modern Army, irregular cavalry, or somewhere else, or not at all?
No, Forrest would not fit at all. The Army doesn't take well to genius. They want competence, but genius doesn't get it with them. You will not find anybody that colors too far outside of the lines. I mean, that's just the truth. Now, if we were on the verge of defeat and someone like him emerged, that might be different. But the Army is a corporate organization. I hate to say it, but it's my Army, but that's the way it is, you know. I can read these too.
Oh, can you see them? Okay.
Yeah, I can.
So the next one is, did Forrest keep Union troops at bay when the Confederates were retreating from Shiloh? We were actually talking about that right before everybody came in from the waiting room.
Well, that minor debacle at Fallen Timbers, Sherman wrote in his report that by the time everything, he had things in regular order again, it was getting close to dark, and his people were tired, and so he abandoned the pursuit. So that's basically what happened. You always hear this stuff about Rommel. No one has ever been able to establish that occurred. War College, no. War College does not do that sort of thing. That's really not in their wheelhouse. Command and Staff College might, but usually doesn't. I'm afraid the germ of political correctness has overtaken most of the Army's academia as well. So you will find possibly some references, but not very much. I think the most praise he ever got from professional military was from Lord Wolseley, who was the Chief of Staff of the British Army. who thought he was the most important or the one that showed genius of anyone in the Civil War. Let's see.
Next question is, did Forrest always use the same kind of deception tactics, and were those the same ones at Murfreesboro and in Mississippi in '63 that he did at Cedar Bluff in Alabama when he bluffed straight?
Well, sort of. Yeah, I mean, he would use the same tactics of. You got to remember, he was a horse trader. Okay, so what he would march more troops by. He would have mount and dismount, that sort of thing. But he also used, it depended on what he had. For instance, as a part of the West Tennessee raid, to fix the troops protecting the railroad in their fortifications, he had a bunch of fires lit to seem that there were many more people than there really were, and he had people beating on drums, which the cavalry had very few drums, so people thought that was infantry. So, you know, he used those same tricks again outside of Pulaski in '64. So, you know, he had well, I should also mention he was an inveterate poker player. And so he had a lot of tricks up his sleeve.
Right. Sounds like it. Let's see. The next question is, does your book cover the Kentucky boys that followed Nathan Bedford Forrest on foot until they could get mounts after he left Bragg? This must have been, I think you referred to them briefly.
Well, yeah, you had, he had there was a Kentucky regiment, the 12th Kentucky Cavalry was in Mississippi. And there were 3 infantry regiments that petitioned to join Forrest that were a part of Johnston's army, and said, because we will get a chance to go home. And so they redesignated mounted infantry, and in '64, the spring of '64, he took them with them. And those were some of the ones that I said attacked Paducah.
Thought you had mentioned them when you were in the talk. Let's see. Here's a great question, and one that I wondered too, but I wasn't quick enough to write it in the chat box. Roy wants to know, what would you say is new here in your book and in your research? What have you discovered that might not have been so well understood about Forrest?
All right, most of this, what I did is not original. I'll tell you the genesis. I'm retired now, and I couldn't find a book that told me where these things actually exactly occurred and why they occurred. You know, the bigger picture that caused there to be a fight at all, and when there was a fight, why did it occur here as over there? What was really going on? So that was kind of what the impetus that I had for writing that book, since I couldn't find it. So that's what I did. I said there's driving directions. I drove every road that I could that was as close to, if not the actual same road, as close as you can get it on modern highways. And I found a bunch of places that were just spots on a map before. That's why I have 109 maps in the book. You can actually physically relate to the ground and see what's going on there. So that's kind of, it's not new in that sense, most of it, but it's kind of a compendium of what interests me, I guess is the best way to say it. I think the only shock that I came up with was the West Tennessee raid. I went to the little town of Clinton, where there's a monuments, hey, cross the Tennessee River here to go into West Tennessee, all kind of things like that. And I stood on that bank and I said, there's something wrong with this. I don't know what it is yet, but I don't feel right about this. So I got back the Jordan and Pryor, which was the first book ever about him and was written with his having read it. Now, a lot of people say he was illiterate. He could read, but he hated to write. He would write, but he said a pen reminded him of a snake, so he didn't like to write, but he could read. And he read this book, There is one parenthetical comment in the entire book. And it says, he crossed at Clinton, parentheses, below at Double Island. And I looked at that and I said, reckon that maybe that was the one change he made in it. So I started looking for Double Island, and Double Island exists now. But then the question is, has the river changed? So I got some Library of Congress maps from 1863, and Double Island's in the same place. And it suddenly made sense. I went to Double Island, which is hard to get to, and you can see that is where the bulk of his troops had to cross, because there were sloughs on either side that would protect the loading and unloading from the Union gunboats that were actually going up and down the river. Now, I've had a lot of pushback from people. Oh, no, it was at Clinton. You know, the Sons of Confederate Veterans put the monument there. The Tennessee Archives put the monument there. I said, yeah, well, it was downriver. So that's probably the only brand new thing I think I came up with. But
I love stuff like that, though. I call myself sometimes a geographic historian because I want to know where everything happened too. Okay, so this is my question. I don't think I've ever heard of Suey Smith.
Suey Smith. Suey.
Okay, where was he from, and what happened to him, and did Grierson take over his command? Because you said Grierson was his second in command. So did Grierson?
No, Grierson did not. Actually, Sam Sturgis took over the command of the cavalry. Suey Smith, he was just I don't remember much about his biography, so I really don't want to say. But Sturgis took over from Smith, and Grierson was his second in command. And Sturgis was the one that lost Price's Crossroads. So Grierson never assumed the command from up there until after, well, no, that's not true. When Sturgis was relieved, Grierson was A.J. Smith's cavalry commander. A.J. Smith mostly had infantry, but Grierson then commanded the cavalry of that region. And then he stayed in Memphis for most of the rest of the war, did another raid when the Nashville campaign was going on, and then at the very last of the war was transferred to the Pensacola-Mobile area and actually raided east across Alabama as Wilson was going across further north.
That's where I recognized Grierson from. I just thought he might have taken over Smith's command. There's the bio of Smith, so it looks like he's from Illinois.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, Ohio. He was born in Ohio, it looks like.
He would be from there. But anyway, yeah, Grierson was an excellent raider, but he didn't have the feel for a battlefield, okay? He really did not. He did poorly against anything like equal numbers of cavalry facing him. But, you know, his big raid made a big difference in the Vicksburg campaign. So, you know, anyway, how do I compare Forrest to Mosby? Well, they were.
Yeah, she specifically asked about horsemanship, daring, reputation, benefit, those things.
Yeah. I would say Forrest made much more difference, more benefits to the Confederacy. I think that they both had excellent horsemanship, daring, and reputation. I don't think Mosby would have ever wanted to one-on-one go with Forrest at any time. I mean, Mosby was a very small, slight individual. Forrest was about 6'2", very strong and muscled. I mean, nobody would have really wanted to go up against him one-on-one. And but I think that, you know, they fill different functions. Mosby stayed behind enemy lines during the last half of the war, whereas Forrest would go in and out. So they were really doing different functions.
And Ron wanted to know about your view of Forrest at Fort Pillow. I think he posted that question before you actually got to it, but maybe just some comments there.
The whole Fort Pillow thing was, of course, a terrible stain on his and his unit's reputation. Now, he was not even aware that war crimes had been committed. Remember, he was on that hill a quarter mile away. And, you know, it took him a while to get down on that path, not only because, you know, it's kind of a steep little path, but also he had been pretty severely shaken up earlier in the day because he had lost a couple of horses, had been shot out from under him, and one of them had fallen on him. So he wasn't his usual vigorous self at that time. He might have been able to stop things a little sooner, but when Chalmers got in the fort, he tried to stop the shooting anyway. And I don't know, no one ever knows how much of that was what, because even the federal reports say that the U.S. colored troops fought more vigorously. Now, whether they were, I don't know. I just don't know. But it certainly was a terrible stain for him that he had to live with for the rest of his life, even though he did not order it. I mean, there is no evidence that a massacre was ordered. Had it been, it would have been just as easy to kill 600 people as it was 300, you know? So anyway.
So Albert said the term war crimes was not used in the 1860s in the same sense that it was used in 1945.
No, not at all. There were no Hague or Geneva conventions at that time. The Union had actually promulgated what they call a Lieber Code, unfortunately often celebrated by violating it, but there was still a sense of, if people surrender, you yield to surrender. But that's not totally true. I mean, you look at places like what was it, Bolivar in the Mexican War, or in the Texan War of Independence. Not the Alamo, but the next place. They surrendered with the understanding they'd be well treated. Santa Anna killed them all. You look at Waterloo, or places like that, places that were strongly held and overrun. It was not unusual for all the defenders to be executed. So the, quote, customs of war, because there weren't any laws at that time, were evolving, but had not been fixed in concrete yet.
So somebody, Richard wants to know, did Sherman really put a bounty on MBF? We hear that all the time. That Sherman
No, he didn't. What he did was he wrote to Stanton, Secretary of War, and said, Forrest, words to the effect, Forrest must be killed if it costs 10,000 men and bankrupts the Treasury. There will never be peace in Tennessee until Forrest is dead. Now, that was in a letter from Sherman to Stanton, but I don't think he ever put a price on him.
Go ahead, Richard.
Did he not offer a promotion to
Yes.
the commander? I mean, wouldn't you still classify that as a bounty?
He did offer a promotion, yes. Promotion to Major General to, oh man, and his name's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, but he did offer a promotion. I agree with that.
So in reality, that would be a bounty.
Yeah, I guess. In that sort of a sense, it certainly would. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right. Now I feel bad because I can't remember that general's name that he promised it to. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway.
That's okay. You'll think of it as we go.
Yeah. Foote considered Forrest to be a genius. Do I? Yes, absolutely. I don't know of anyone. Even, Sherman after the war said he had an original genius that Sherman could never comprehend. Joe Johnston after the war said if he had had a military education, and I'm not sure I agree with it, if he'd had a military education, he would have been the central figure of the war. So, there were a lot of, I think, people now try to evaluate on things that were not relevant back then. I prefer to look at the evaluations by his contemporaries. Okay.
Like a good way to do it. We got another question about the bounty, which I think Cody, did that pretty much cover it for you? I think Cody might have already logged off, but if not, we'll make sure that oh, there you are, Cody. Did that pretty much cover it for you?
Yes, thank you very much. That's what I wanted to know, because that is a prevalent myth about a bounty, meaning like anybody who brings the head of Nathan Bedford Forrest was going to get $10,000. So I just wanted to clear that up for my own research.
Yeah, I think it was Mauer. Now that I think of it, was the general that was a brigadier general and said, "I'll make you a major general if you kill him." I think it was Mauer. Engagements with Fielding Hurst, 6th Tennessee Federal Cavalry. Actually, that wasn't Forrest, wasn't present for that. Forrest was up north. That was one of his, I want to say it was Nixon's Tennesseans, maybe the 20th Tennessee. It's kind of humorous. Fielding Hurst was a notorious Union sympathizer from Tennessee, and he promulgated several atrocities. He was hated. Forrest actually virtually put a bounty on him, said, "I want you to surrender this man so he can be tried," because he basically extorted thousands of dollars from Jackson not to burn him, and then burned half the town anyway. He was that kind of person. But this one regiment of Forrest men, like I say, Forrest wasn't present, ran into Hurst's column. And Hurst and his men ran away, and the report was rather humorous. It said, "Well, we captured Fielding Hurst. Hurst retreated into Memphis. We captured Fielding Hurst's wagons and his 2 mistresses, one black and one white." So that was a part of the formal report. You can find that in there. So I thought that was kind of shows you about Fielding Hurst. But Fielding Hurst survived the war, and in fact was very popular with the first Republican governor after Johnson. I remember his name in a minute too. But anyway, okay.
Okay, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit into because Tina typed in, you guys don't forget about the discount at Savas Beatty. She typed that in the box for you there. The discount code is there, and it's all caps. And the next question is, what do you think of the Forrest redemption story toward the end of his life? Did he really make great changes, truth or myth?
Yes, his wife was always religious. Her foster father was a Presbyterian minister, and he kept ministers around. But he was non-practicing, perhaps is the best to say. I don't think he was ever convinced by religion for a long period. But after the war, after all the hurly-burly, in the early 1870s, he experienced a religious conversion. And of course, a lot of people talk about him, the Klan, this, that, and the other, but they forget that he kept a bunch of his slaves with him during the war, and they stayed with him. Remember, they were behind enemy lines and on horseback. They could have left. He only lost one, and that was the guy that was that was driving a wagon in late August of 1862, when Forrest got ambushed by surprise as people were dead tired, and everybody made it away except the wagon and the driver, and that was the one of his slaves that didn't ever make it back. So he was not, his speech to the pallbearers in Memphis, which was very positive toward blacks, was not a change. He understood them as human. In fact, he hired them for his plantation after the war. When he was building a railroad, he hired blacks, and in fact got in trouble with the Freedmen's Bureau because he was paying them more than the Freedmen's Bureau was paying. So it's not like there was a sea change, in spite of, white supremacy was a thing, North and South, everywhere, but he still respected them as individual people. And in the religion, like I said, yes, I think he publicly said to one of the reunions of his escort. He said, "I'm not the man that you remember anymore. And I think I'm now a better man." And that was all part of it.
There's
And
a lot of really nice comments in here. And then I'm going to scroll down to, so you probably want to read those, but I'm going to scroll down to the next question, which Michael would like to know. There's different, you see different numbers of wounds and how many horses are shot out from under him during the war. Do you have a number that you go with?
no, I don't even count because, it depends on how you count. I see this has supplies and manpower would be unstoppable. The thing is, he had to do everything he had to do. He had to be a battalion commander. He had to be a regimental commander. He had to be a brigade commander. He had to be a division commander. He had to do all those because he was continually learning. If you look at Murfreesboro, the first place I said he made a difference, he did not dispose, he didn't put his troops out properly and assign the missions properly. They just kind of got carried away by enthusiasm and what they did. His leadership made a difference, but his thought process beforehand didn't. But he matured and he learned throughout the war. His peak was Bryce's Crossroads. And the second peak was the delay of Wilson, well, of the Woods 4th Corps and Wilson protecting the Army after Nashville. Those were absolutely genius. Okay, let's see. Well, it's interesting. Forrest has a reputation. I'm talking about the terribly frustrated. Forrest has a reputation of not getting along with anybody, but that's not really true. First supervisor was Tillman, no problem. Clark, no problem. Fort Donelson, yeah, problem there, okay, but for obvious reasons. Sidney Johnson, no problem. Beauregard, no problem. And then Bragg, yeah, problems. Wheeler, problems. Van Dorn, problems. Polk, no problems. What's the guy in Mobile that was temporarily in command? S.D. Lee, no problems, even though he disagreed with him on some things. Richard Taylor, no problems. So, the majority he actually got along with fairly well. How many wounds and horror? Like I say, it's 29-30 or 30-31, who knows? Parson Brownlow, you got that right. That was the governor I was thinking of. Fielding and Brownlow got along, but a lot of people didn't get along with him.
Okay, Nate said he'll come in last if you have time for one more.
All right.
You have time for one more? We just dove into the actions in later life where he pretty much disavowed the actions against blacks and how he wasn't really at fault for what's transpired at Fort Pillow after the fort was overrun. Why do you think the stigma of Forrest as a racist and avid Klansman still stuck with him? Just people not reading deeply into it to become educated, or because he was a slave trader and owner connection? What do you think?
I think very few people have actually read into the depth. And a lot of people nowadays, unfortunately, a general criticism, they don't read history as about people in their own time. They say, well, let's see, this person did this. I would never do that. So obviously this person is bad. No, different times. Like I said, white supremacy, the black codes were a thing north and south. They weren't just in one area of the country. Their times were different then. Did he feel the white man was in general superior? Sure he did. So did almost every other white person in America, north and south. That's just the way it was. And You've got to judge these people in their own time, but most people do not have the interest to delve deeply and don't care. And at the propaganda machine of 40,000 pamphlets talking about all the ugly stuff he did, you know, it's hard to overcome that. I've had a good friend of mine will say, well, the Congressional Commission established. Well, he has a lot more respect for congressional commissions than I do.
Okay, so just a reminder that next week we have Jan Kroon here with talking about her book, The War Outside My Window, the Civil War Diary of Leroy Wiley Gresham. We appreciate everyone stopping by tonight, tuning in and asking your questions of General Scales. And we especially appreciate you, General Scales, for joining us tonight and providing such a great presentation. Don't forget that you can order the book from Savas Beatty or from General Scales directly, and I believe you can get it from the website johnscales.com. Is that correct, General Scales?
That's right. johnscales.com. You
can order it directly from the website, or you can order it from Savas Beatty, and we appreciate Savas Beatty so much for helping to arrange this program and getting John all set up and giving us connection to get this set up. So you guys support both of them, the author and the publisher, please, and join us next week to hear Jan Kroon. We're all looking forward to it, and I hope to see you then.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome, huh? Did y'all like